Alright, here we are. I'm giving you a look at the latest overview for what we're going to be covering in this live update, whether you're tuning into this as I'm doing it live or if you're watching after. I'm glad to have you here. Thank you very much for tuning into this update, as we're going to be talking about the final update here for the winter storm before it begins anyway, as impacts are coming for especially parts of the central and the eastern United States as we go through the last few days of the week from Wednesday through the early part of Friday. At least we're going to be watching impacts pushing from the plains and Midwest all the way to the East Coast, and we will have some gusty winds and at least some impactful spots of rain, even if you're not necessarily in some of the zones that are going to get the most severe weather or blizzard-like conditions out of the storm. Make sure you're hitting that like button, but let's go ahead and get right into it, covering the latest details on what to watch. We're going to start by flipping right on over here to the latest winter storm overview graphic I've made, as impacts are set to begin overnight tonight on our March 18th into our March 19th, and then begin spreading eastward into other parts of the country. You can see here in the areas shaded in green on your screen, that's where I'm currently anticipating at least some rain to be in the mix. There will be the possibility for some severe weather up into some parts of the Midwest. I'll talk about that in just a minute. The reason I don't have a yellow, orange, or red highlight for that on this overview graphic is because some of the highest potential for severe weather is actually going to be in some of the zones that end up getting that transition, that mix from rain, eventually over to some sleet possibly, and then to some snow there in a place like Chicago, Illinois, maybe even into far southern Wisconsin. Speaking of the mix, some of those zones, including Missouri, Iowa, Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan, northern Indiana, those zones in the purple are going to be where we're going to have the best chance for rain that turns to snow, and some of that snow could accumulate as this event goes on. You could certainly see snowflakes before this event is all said and done in some of the areas that even see rain. It just won't accumulate as much. We will also have that potential for rain to turn to snow into some parts of the Northeast as this event goes on deeper into the week around Thursday into Friday. Biggest chance for snow out of this particular event, though, by far, it's going to be with that heaviest stripe that we get right back on out here into parts of the Central Plains, exiting northern Kansas, into parts of especially southeast Nebraska, through parts of Iowa, up into Minnesota, as well as parts of north central Wisconsin and the upper peninsula of Michigan as it moves on through. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and pivot the scene right on over, and we're going to go ahead and jump right into the latest timing. There's the scene that I want on screen. This is your latest European model. In just a minute, we will talk about some of the more specific impacts, including the close-range HRRR model using Radar Omega. These are weather bell model maps that are on screen, though. Of course, on a lot of my videos, I have the free trial link for Weatherbell if you ever want to check that out. But let's go ahead and jump right into this discussion as we're going to start timing out that winter storm that's going to begin, especially as we go through the rest of this evening and into the overnight, where we're going to be watching that band of snow that could have associated blizzard conditions moving on out here into parts of the Central Plains, where parts of western and northern Kansas, southeastern Nebraska, including Lincoln and Omaha, up through Council Bluffs, parts of Sioux City there in Iowa. We're going to be watching some snowfall kicking up as the overnight hours turn into the post-dawn hours of our Wednesday morning. Around that same time, we'll have to watch any showers and storms we have in this zone. It might be a little hard to see on this zoomed-out version of the screen, but parts of Iowa, northern Illinois, into southern Wisconsin, we'll have some elevated rotating storms overnight tonight, and wherever that happens, before we crashed from temperatures getting around 60 at this point in the day, down to 30 as the snow comes in later in the day, we could certainly see at least a potential for some small to medium-sized hail that could get upwards of quarter size in a few instances as a result of those storms that will be elevating due to all that wind energy in the atmosphere. That will be a decent bit off the ground, thankfully, and will keep the tornado threat generally at bay. Where we could see a little bit more of a tornado threat is with any storms that we see developing here into parts of far southern Wisconsin, south of the snow line, through parts of Illinois, back down here into Indiana, maybe western Kentucky, with generally more of a damaging wind threat out of any isolated to scattered severe storms we see through the late day Wednesday time frame. On the back end of this storm, we'll continue to watch snow, probably ending as the evening goes on, but still with high wind that could create near whiteout blizzard conditions through southeast Nebraska. Parts of Iowa getting snow, same will going up here through far southeastern Minnesota, and then it really looks like we're going to be seeing snow going strong, pushing through some parts of Wisconsin, the upper peninsula of Michigan, continuing here through our Wednesday evening. Overnight, Wednesday night into our Thursday morning, we'll continue to watch some snow wrapping back around into the same zones that saw severe thunderstorms possibly not too long prior, around 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 in the evening. On our Wednesday, we could see some strong storms in and around Chicago and Milwaukee. By the time we're waking up on our Thursday morning, there could be a little bit of some snow on the ground in some of those suburbs of those two metro areas. That's going to be a crazy thing to see. Around that same time, we'll also be watching a general band of some light to moderate showers and storms continuing east. That will be moving through parts of the Ohio Valley as well as stretching all the way back down towards the mid-south. Not going to be too impactful to the morning commute as we get into our Thursday, but nonetheless, we'll get some wind and rain moving through the Appalachians around Thursday midday. We'll see some more rain closer to the East Coast. We'll have to watch, I think, some of these storms. We might end up getting at at least a lower end severe risk out of these. Nothing too potent, but at least some isolated severe weather possible near the mid-Atlantic as some storms roll through there around Thursday afternoon and evening. Generally just a lot of rain there from New York back down into those zones. We'll get a little bit of snow pop probably in some of those zones that I have the mix zone highlighted on that graphic I showed at the start of the stream. But by the time we get through the overnight hours of Friday night into Saturday morning, that system will likely be wrapping up. And we're really going to be pretty dry for most of the rest of the weekend until we see our next system try to form somewhere in the central United States. And the south side of that system will be something we have to watch for some possible severe weather in the warm sector there, starting around Sunday and into Sunday night, down into parts of the south central U.S. That's going to be a little bit more of a story for another time. But while we're on the topic of the winter storm, I do want to go ahead and jump back on over here into talking about a few of the weather alerts that we have issued by the National Weather Service and those highest end alerts in particular for this system. First of all, on your screen right now, you can see these are the blizzard warnings as of when I'm doing the stream on our Tuesday evening that we have issued, especially for our Wednesday time frame, exiting far eastern and especially northeastern Colorado into Hayes, Great Bend, and then points northbound from Salina and Manhattan there in Kansas through around the northwestern third of the state, through about the southeastern half of Nebraska, excluding the far southeastern 4 counties as of now. We have a blizzard warning in effect that includes Kearney, Norfolk, back down to Beatrice, Lincoln, Omaha, and then you can see there into Sioux City, over to Fort Dodge, Mason City in Iowa, blizzard warnings in effect, as well as on out there to Rochester, Minnesota. That means wind gusts upwards of at least 40 miles per hour are looking pretty likely at this point in time, as well as that being paired with some snowfall, obviously, as I just timed out some of that snow. That could mean that we see very significant impacts, and that has continued to be more and more likely with some gusts that could exceed 50 to 60 miles per hour in isolated fashion, creating near impossible travel. It's going to be a very difficult day of travel in these zones, even as the snow winds down. So that's something to watch. Also keep in mind, over a lot of the same areas, as well as some areas that won't see as much or any snow, we do have high wind warnings in effect, and that's what this graphic is showing you. Again, these are as of when I'm doing this Tuesday evening live stream. These are the high wind warnings that have already been issued. We have wind advisories for 35, 45, 55 mile per hour gusts over a lot more zones, but these are the highest ones that are going to have the best chance to cause damage to trees and power lines, maybe blow over some semi-trucks. We saw some of that with similar winds to this. Back into some of those highways in the southern plains. There were all the kinds of videos of that circulating around the internet after that happened late last week with the most recent storm. You can see from Roswell and Santa Fe there in New Mexico up to Amarillo and Lubbock in Texas, stretching all the way through parts of the central plains and up to Lincoln, Nebraska, Des Moines, Iowa, and north central Missouri. We're going to be watching those high wind warnings certainly as the impacts move on through with this particular system. Again, this is going to be during especially the Wednesday and Wednesday night time frame. So let's go ahead and spend a little bit of time focusing more on that blizzard aspect of the storm system. I'm going to talk a little bit about the snowfall timing for some of these zones. Then we'll talk a little bit about some of the winds that will impact there and elsewhere. Then we'll talk about severe weather before we kind of wrap up the discussion about this particular storm system and answer any of the questions we have here live or after the stream. I'm going to go ahead and jump right on over to Radar Omega and the timing, and we're going to use this HRRR model just as some advertising to give you a look at what's going to be happening as we continue to go through the rest of this evening and overnight into our Wednesday morning, where we're going to be watching temperatures that have been in the 70s and 80s in some of these zones of Nebraska and Kansas today, quickly plummeting overnight, leading to areas of snow that will be paired with wind. You can see Lexington, Nebraska getting in on some heavy snow as we get into the wee morning hours of our Wednesday, and snow will continue to crash over towards Lincoln and Omaha, likely as we get some point through the mid-morning. The exact timeline is, of course, always going to be perfectly uncertain because these models are not perfectly correct. But from Omaha back down to Lincoln, expect sometime once we get past dawn, especially in the morning, for some of our rain to quickly turn over maybe to some sleet, and then to some of that heavy snow that will be wrapping around the back end of the storm and could be trying to be wrapping back around all the way around the southwest side of the low down there towards Wichita. We'll see how close that heavy band of snow gets to you, because if it does wrap around, you could certainly end up with a little bit of some unexpected snowfall accumulations, especially on the north side of town. Nonetheless, around again this morning time frame, we'll also be watching some of those elevated supercells moving through other parts of the Midwest. We'll again focus on some of those and how they will progress through the day Wednesday in more detail here in just a minute. But you can see places like Topeka, Kansas, maybe seeing a transition to some snow as the day goes on. Not everybody's going to see the heaviest band, but wherever we do have this snow falling, anywhere from Wisconsin back down here to Minnesota to northwestern Iowa, we will have that potential for some blizzard conditions, and we'll even have some gusty winds blowing around general snowfall up into the upper peninsula of Michigan as we go throughout the day on our Wednesday. Snow will continue to sink around the back end of this low as the evening rolls on, so places like Des Moines will get some snow at times as we go through the afternoon and evening. Snow will eventually move out of places like Nebraska and Kansas, although whatever may have accumulated on the ground could still be blowing around due to high winds. We could see snow breaking out in this band of possible rain that will be wrapping around the back end of our storm. Through some parts of Missouri up into western parts of Illinois, it's looking like we could have snow breaking out of there and into southeastern Iowa sometime around 7, 8, 9, 10 into our Wednesday evening. Snow possible on up in moderate to heavy fashion as well through Green Bay, Oshkosh there in Wisconsin, all the way up to Marquette, Michigan, while we'll still be seeing those storms moving through parts of the Ohio Valley. But again, as I mentioned earlier, as soon as we see storms, just about 6 to 12 hours later, we'll actually be seeing that colder side of the storm wrapping around. So sure enough, Springfield, Bloomington, Chicago, Illinois, spots that are near 60 and 70 today, as well as even into tomorrow as a result of that south to north push on the warm side of this system. They'll transition down into the 20s and 30s overnight into our Thursday morning, and we'll see some of that snow certainly breaking out in those zones. And of course, eventually with time in some of those areas I talked about earlier, we will have that possibility of snow breaking out eastward with this storm as well. That will go through some parts of the Ohio Valley and Great Lakes through the day Thursday, and we'll also have to watch a similar trend into some parts of the northeast U.S. As we get towards the end of the day Thursday and then into our Friday. In terms of forecasted snowfall accumulation, I'm going to go ahead and give you the latest look at the National Digital Forecast database here. Give me just a second to pull up that graphic. All right, here we go. We're going to go ahead and jump right back on over to this. And then we're going to zoom in on some of these zones here. Of course, we're going to be watching a lot of heavy snow through some parts of the Mountain West as we go within the next 24 to 72 hours as well from this system, and some new energy that will eventually be moving into the Pacific Northwest towards the end of this 72-hour period. But let me go ahead and zoom in particularly on some of these individual states. We'll start with Kansas, and then we'll pivot north from there and into some of the other zones. Here's Kansas's forecasted snowfall accumulation as of when I'm doing this live stream. You can see around the northwestern third or two-thirds, depending on how you look at this, of the state, expecting at least a dusting to a couple of inches of snow. Again, it's going to be around or on that north side of Wichita where we get that heavier band of snow to set up, but wherever that happens, we could at least get a couple inches. Some spots that are closer to the Kansas-Nebraska border could get more like 4 to 6 inches of snow. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about Nebraska. You can see a lot of the state expecting at least 2 to 4 inches, maybe closer to 6 to 10 as you exit there and then come into this state, that state being Iowa. It's going to be about the northwestern third. That heavy stripe is going to be very thin, but many spots could get 3 to 6 inches in it. I would argue that some of these totals could extend a little bit further east as we'll see some of that snow wrapping back around the back end of this system, but you get the general point. A lot of 3 to 6 inch totals in northwestern Iowa, some spots getting closer to 6 to 10 on that high end. That will continue through the far southeastern part of Minnesota. It's a little bit hard to see on the screen, but right down there at the very bottom, you can see the southeastern part of Minnesota expecting at least 3 inches, some spots getting closer to 6 to 8. A similar trend will continue all the way up into Wisconsin, where a lot of the north-central part of the state and some of those zones that I was listing earlier in that tighter band, we'll be watching 3 to 6 plus inch totals there, and then we could even get a foot plus of some snow in that isolated heavier pocket somewhere there into the upper peninsula of Michigan. Before this system is all said and done. Before we talk about the severe weather, I did mention that I was going to talk about the wind in a little bit more detail. Let's go ahead and pull up some blended guidance that's going to help us do that a little bit better here using these European ensembles on screen. Starting as we go into the overnight of tonight and into our Wednesday morning, let's blow this up, and you can see that we're going to be watching breezy times, especially over some parts of the central United States. We're particularly in this zone that I'm circling, we're going to have the potential for some 40 plus mile per hour gusts, some spots even exceeding 50 miles per hour for gusts in places like Nebraska, Kansas, and Oklahoma, wrapping back around the storm in some of those zones that could be watching snow as we go throughout the day. And again, this is what's going to create near impossible travel and some of those blizzard conditions. We're going to have winds on both sides of the storm by the time Wednesday goes on. So south to north winds on the front side with 40 to 50 mile per hour gusts there, and a lot of the zones with wind advisories up and down the Mississippi Valley. Where we have the high wind warnings, that's where that heaviest pocket is going to go. Again, right here, especially out of parts of Nebraska, Kansas, and then eventually extending all the way on up here into Iowa. Some spots could get upwards of 50 to 60 mile per hour gusts in isolated fashion as these winds move on through. As we go overnight, Wednesday night and into the early morning hours of our Thursday. Some gusts could still be upwards of 30 to 40 miles per hour as we see that snow wrap around the backside of the system around and to the south side of Lake Michigan. And then into our Thursday afternoon, we'll see more wind gusts kicking up around and behind the low as it continues to drag that cold front, getting down here gradually closer to that east coast of the U.S. It'll continue to be a breezy day with some 30 to 40 mile per hour wind gusts being possible from Michigan and Indiana and Ohio all the way back down to the southeast. And eventually we will have some gusts pushing through parts of southern New England, even all the way through the day Friday. Now, one other thing that we need to talk about in addition to the blizzard, that is going to be the severe weather potential we're going to have out of this particular storm system. Let me go ahead and pivot you right on over to my latest graphic here, the ONW severe scale for our March 19th. And this is going to be mostly through the daytime hours as well as into the evening. A lot of our severe weather threats will gradually wane, especially as we get beyond midnight into the night and into the overnight hours, into the early part of our Thursday morning. Isolated to maybe even in a few cases, especially in the yellow, scattered severe storms may be possible over some parts of the Midwest, Mississippi Valley, and over to the Mid-South and Ohio Valley, with spots of hail and damaging winds being the primary risks from Iowa and Wisconsin back down to Mississippi and Alabama. A weak tornado may spin up in a storm or two, especially in this zone up here where we are going to be in that higher wind field, even at the lower levels with this particular storm system. One thing that this storm system is going to be lacking is going to be the intense moisture, as a lot of dew points are only going to be in the 40s and 50s. Typically, that value needs to be in the upper 50s into the 60s for a more widespread severe weather event. That's what we had with those large-scale tornado outbreaks that we had in the Mississippi Valley and Mid-South last week. That particular storm system has made this one struggle to gather up more moisture, but still, we do have up to a level 3 of 7 of severe weather risk here into parts of Illinois, Indiana, as well as Kentucky, and that is something that you certainly need to be paying very close attention to, as this is a non-zero tornado threat, and we could even get some higher winds than just the non-thunderstorm winds that will already be blowing around. Let's go ahead and jump on over here to Radar Omega and give you some of the latest timing that is anticipated on that. Now, this is not going to give you a perfect idea of when to expect storms in your area, but it gives you a perfect time frame to be watching. So a general overview of when you need to be looking at this, not a specific hour. I don't want you to focus on that. Just focus on the general time when storms are expected to fire up. First of all, you can see using this composite reflectivity, this basically just shows the intensity of some of the storms that we'll be moving on through. We are going to be watching an environment where we could see some of these storms exiting southeastern Nebraska and through some parts of Iowa, producing some hail into the overnight hours of tonight. We could even see some thunder snow in these areas back here into Nebraska, where we'll already be seeing the rain and sleet turning over to snow as the morning rolls on. That'll be an interesting thing to watch, as we've got a lot of upper level energy moving through the atmosphere. As we go through the day, we'll have to continue to watch any of those storms in Iowa, southern Wisconsin, parts of northern Illinois for that potential of some supercell related structures, where we could see some brief rotation, especially above the surface, leading to a very close to zero tornado threat and mostly just a hail threat. We'll have to see, though, because again, very close to zero is not a zero tornado threat. That's something we'll have to keep an eye on, at least into some parts of Iowa, southern Wisconsin, and then on over here into Illinois. I think some of our stronger storms are going to fire up as the afternoon goes on, though. I'd say as early as around lunchtime, and thereafter we could see some storms from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, back down here to Bloomington, Lincoln, Decatur, and Illinois with this first little band of energy. There will be multiple swirls of energy, so to speak, coming around the south side of this system. And you can see how by the time we get through the later evening hours, we'll have to continue to watch some of these storms, at least on up here through northern Illinois, to be having those supercell structures. Again, these are going to be pretty moisture lacking, so to speak, but they'll have that possibility to produce an isolated tornado, as well as that hail, especially as they move on through. We'll also eventually probably see a line of storms, especially as we get closer to dusk, through the dinner time towards dusk time hours, anywhere from around Chicago, maybe forming into some broken clusters back down here through some parts of Indiana, back down to Kentucky, and that's why I have the level 3 of 7 in those zones as well, as isolated scattered damaging winds, some pockets of hail, as well as even a couple of tornadoes couldn't be ruled out along that line. Overall, the severe weather event looks pretty weak by the time it gets into the overnight hours, as we'll just be watching general rain and storms with possibly some gusty winds, maybe a spin up, continuing closer to the Ohio River zone. Back down here all the way towards parts of Tennessee, Alabama, exiting Mississippi, we'll see some of these storms through the evening as well that could be at least on the feisty side. And then look at this, by the time we're getting well overnight, everything's just rain as it gets closer to the Appalachians, and that generally looks like a trend that will continue even as we go into the day Thursday. with these storms getting closer to the east coast. With that being said, that's all I have to say about this particular storm system, except for one last thing. I do want to briefly talk again about some of the temperature gradients that will come with the storm system. I don't know if I can look at what the high temperatures were today. Here we go. Here's what the forecasted high temperatures for today were not long ago. Here we go. Now you can see it on screen. We have had temperatures in the 80s over a lot of the Central Plains today on our Tuesday. Tomorrow, crashing down, look at this. Northern Kansas, 83 today, 39 for a high tomorrow, and that's going to be before the snow even starts falling. It will only dip down further from there, as a lot of these zones are going to end up below freezing at some point into the deeper afternoon hours of our Wednesday. Out ahead of our storm, though, we're not struggling to see 60s and 70s all the way on up to parts of the Ohio Valley, and again, that's why we're going to have to watch with at least some moisture being pulled north. That severe weather threat and that non-zero tornado risk we could see southeast Iowa, southern Wisconsin, and then especially into some parts of Illinois, western Indiana, back down into Kentucky. We'll see lots of 70s and 80s all up and down the East Coast region of the U.S. In fact, on Wednesday, by Thursday, though, look at that. There's your trough, that dip in the jet stream that's going to come in behind this system. Out ahead of it, still in the 60s and 70s along the immediate East Coast. Still in the 60s back here into some parts of the plains, but a dip of 30s and 40s coming on down through the Great Lakes and Ohio Valley. There's your cold air. And again, some of these zones, even in Tennessee, only hitting 45, and that might be during the early pre-dawn hours as well, as we continue to see things cool down through some parts of the day on Thursday. Going to be a very chilly time on the back end of the system for a lot of these zones, to say the least. With that being said, that is all I have to say for this live update, but I do want to answer a couple of comments and questions that are on here with me live before we close this out. Let's see what we have. There's been a lot of discussion going on with Weatherman of the North 154. Thank you very much for joining me. He is also a new member of the channel, and I do want to use that to remind everyone, if you have not seen already, you can now become a member of my YouTube channel, with custom emojis and icons being one of the things that will accompany that membership, as well as priority comment reply. That will come for only 99 cents per month at that level. And then if you want members-only videos, that will be additional content on top of what I already post. I'll probably be starting up some of those members-only videos within a few weeks, so be on the lookout for those if you are becoming a member of the $2.99 per month level. That's what it includes. All of those things on your screen for that. But the 99 cent per month level already includes the custom emojis and icons, as well as priority comment reply. So I'd love it if you'd consider that. Right down below, there is a pinned comment, and it says join the channel for just 99 cents per month to get access to perks. And you can click that link if you are interested in joining. But thanks again for joining Weatherman of the North. Y'all have a great evening. Of course, he's using the awesome little emojis and icons. You can see them right there in the live chat if you're with me on live. If you're watching after, you might not be able to see them. But if anybody has any additional comments and questions, drop those down below. Looks like I didn't miss anything on here during the live stream. So with that being said, we're going to close things out. Thank you very much for tuning in, and that's all I got to say.